is documenting wars from the ground, reporting on conflicts wherever they happen in the world, but always with one question in mind: how to make humanity stand out from the battlefield. Please join me in welcoming Finbarr O'Reilly.
I applied for the Carmignac Award for 2020, mainly because I had been working in Congo off and on for 20 years. I'd started there as a newswire photographer for Reuters, spent a couple of years documenting the conflict there, and I wanted to go back and look at how the conflict had unfolded, one of the biggest conflicts in the world over the span of 20 years. And, but what I really wanted to look at was not the news element of it. I wanted to look at the deeper historical structures that existed from the time of the Belgian colonials, who had really extracted as much as they could from the country and left a legacy of extraction that continues to this day around minerals mostly, such as gold, diamonds, timber, and other things that we use in all our computers and mobile phones. I imagine you're now aware with a lot of these things. And I wanted to look at some of the positive shifts that were happening in the country democratically, with elections, with development, and daily life that often doesn't get reported in the news, trying to show a little more nuanced view of the country. And some of the things that I would encounter in the time that I lived there that went a little bit beyond the headlines. But of course, all of this was unfolding with the backdrop of a conflict that has killed millions of people. The numbers vary between 5 and 8 million people over the last 25 years or so. So a significant conflict. It was also unfolding in the midst of an Ebola epidemic, the second deadliest Ebola epidemic in history after the one in West Africa. So these things were part of the story. It was also happening in the midst of the COVID pandemic. So there were challenges that presented themselves in terms of how I was going to report this. And I initially suspended some of the work, and I'll explain to you after going through first the work that I did and coming back to how we managed this situation. So these are some images from covering the Ebola outbreak that was intersecting with COVID initially in 2020. Millions of displaced across the country due to fighting between various armed groups. There are anything between 80 and 120 different armed groups, mostly operating in the east of the country. And most of the people in those last couple of pictures were folks who had left their homes and villages after attacks by rival militias. And of course, a lot of what's being fought over are the natural resources, as I mentioned, in this case, gold. These are some of the gold mines where at this particular point when I was taking these images, gold had reached an all-time high during the COVID crisis. A lot of child labor and other problematic labor practice linked to the global capitalist structures of extraction. And of course, there is one of the largest, if not the largest, UN peacekeeping mission in Congo that has largely been completely ineffective in terms of protecting civilians from the violence and fighting. This means that a lot of the institutions and structures have collapsed. The healthcare system, the prison system. In this particular prison in the city of Bunia, there were dozens of prisoners who had actually starved to death. As Robin mentioned earlier, the situations in a lot of prisons in places like Zimbabwe, Congo, you need to have people bring you food, bring you sanitary goods, medicines, anything. Without that, you're likely to fare very poorly. While I was there, there was also a major eruption of a volcano in Nyiragongo in the city of Goma, which led to a massive exodus of the city's entire population nearly. Over 1 million people, possibly up to 2 million people had to flee, not only because lava was pouring through the streets and burning homes, as it had done also 20 years previously, but also because there was a massive lake there with huge deposits of methane gas, which were at risk of bubbling to the surface and possibly creating a poisonous cloud And that was actually a bigger worry than the actual eruption itself. So again, a massive displacement of population and another situation of strife. And all of these cracks in society and the institutions are, of course, revealed. And the idea behind a lot of the work was showing that, you know, whether it was the armed groups and the attacks or even these kinds of situations that are natural disasters, the legacy of what the Belgian colonial system left was at the root cause of many of these problems, whether it was political or social. This resulted in the usual publication of a monograph that the Carmignac Foundation does every year with every laureate, which featured a number of the images that I've shown you previously. It also involved a partnership that we built with the International Criminal Court, which asked us to document a number of individuals who either were survivors of trials or war crimes that were committed and tried at the court, and where people were convicted of war crimes. And some of these people were recipients of reparations, sometimes 10 and 15 years, 20 years after the actual events. But some were also recipients of a fund that helps people who are still living within situations of violence and have been survivors of the kind of violence that was carried out in these crimes. So this is Dorica, one of the young women who came forward and was willing to talk about her experience of sexual violence at the hands of different militia. Actually, it was the government army for her, in her case, as well as mother and daughter. The daughter in this case was the product of sexual violence at the hands of a militia. And her daughter, this is Ruta is the mother, Rebecca is the daughter, and her daughter suffered the same fate and also became pregnant through rape. So it's a recurring situation where rape is widely used as a weapon of war in Congo. And a number of other individuals who were also either displaced or had been survivors of massacres and were receiving reparations from the court itself. I'm going to move through that work fairly quickly. That was my own work, but when we talk about impact, social impact, and the kind of shifts that can happen within society and within storytelling and narratives, what I'm much more proud of, similar to what Robin was saying, is part of the project that we did during COVID, when I didn't travel to the country for a long period and decided that with the Carmignac that we would team up with a handful of Congolese photographers and visual artists who I knew from my years of working there, and others who I met when we started this project. It was about a dozen in total, but a core group of say 9 or so, a mixture of men and women, most of them in their early 20s, a number of whom had just contacted me on Facebook to talk about photography. And when we decided to work with them, the idea was that I would assign them and work with them to develop stories that they wanted to tell from their own neighborhoods and families during COVID, so that they could really contribute to the flow of information around what was happening in society during this pandemic when people couldn't go out, people couldn't travel. And so they were documenting aspects of their own lives and how Congo was responding to this particular health crisis, and sending this flow of information into the kind of global understanding of what was happening. Africa is perceived to have not suffered as badly as some other continents during the pandemic. Probably not quite the case, but in the case of Congo, there was still the underlying current of conflict, civil unrest, and the photographers documented all of this throughout 2020. And we created a website where, for the first time, Carmignac was working with photographers from the community country where we were reporting on, but also publishing in real time. Usually, a Carmignac laureate will work for 6 months or so and produce a book and exhibitions that are published a year almost later than when the images were taken. But this was the first time that we were doing it in real time. So we're looking at things like access to education, electricity for students who weren't at school, how could they do their lessons remotely when a lot of them didn't have internet, and then what it was like when they returned to classes. And then a lot of it was surrounding daily life, and I'll give you the names of these photographers. This one was Raissa Rezibuka, the previous one was Arlette Bashizi, and they wanted to show, again, aspects of what life in Congo, in their communities, look like to them. In some situations, it looks similar to how a foreigner, myself, would document it. In other ways, not, much more intimate, maybe like the previous image of Arlette's little sister studying at home by the light of her mobile phone, when she couldn't go to school and there was no electricity at night. Things like access to water and hygiene were also subjects that we covered as part of our flowing reportage. Militia unrest, still an issue throughout the pandemic, as well as how Congo was grappling with the social movement around Black Lives Matter at a time when everybody was looking very closely at how colonial links to the past are influencing our societies. So it just so happened that one of our Congolese photographers was in Belgium at the time and was looking at how Congolese in Belgium were looking at how the Belgian colonial legacy was part of this bigger global issue that's often overlooked. From this work that they produced over the span of that year, we published a book with 2 different covers, one more political, one more social. And within that, we also published a series of their work in a number of exhibitions across France, in Poquerolles, in Paris, on the gates of the City Hall, Tour de Saint-Jacques, as well as exhibitions in Belgium and in New York. The collaboration that I had done with the International Criminal Court, we also had an exhibition at the UN headquarters in New York. So all of this work was reaching a broad audience. And one of the exhibitions we did at the Bronx Documentary Center in New York, and Arlette Bashizi, one of the photographers whose work you were seeing earlier, was able to present the work to Dr. Mukwege, the Nobel Peace Prize laureate from her province in Eastern Congo. So again, impact, what does this mean? I think the images that I produced for my book on Congo contributed to the overall flow of information about the conflict there, about the resource extraction. But on a far deeper level, and a far more rewarding level, is to see how through the Carmignac project of working with and mentoring these photographers, they've now been able to launch careers of their own that would have been unimaginable without the support of the grant. While that volcano erupted, I was on the ground. All the photographers that are in that city, Goma, about 4 of them, we all ran out together. We were all able to document and photograph together, come back to the places where we were staying in the evening, go through our edits, look at who shot what and how, and really be able to kind of see what was working, which photographers' images were working. And interestingly enough, Arlette was, I think at the beginning, one of the ones who was the least advanced in terms of her visual language and the most timid. But through the process of this group work, and they have a wonderful connection among themselves as well, helping each other at the early stages, lending each other lenses and cameras to go out and shoot. But in the meantime, over the last year or so, she's just improved exponentially and just shot through the roof, where she's now producing and traveling on assignments for the New York Times, for the Washington Post, not just in Congo, but in other countries, in Gabon and Tanzania, Uganda. She's just been in Ethiopia for the Washington Post. And it's just a steady flow of front page stories and deep investigations that she's producing, covering some of the same stories that are always going to be part of the narrative in Congo, but doing it in her own way. A Congolese photographer documenting her own country, I think is a significant shift from the likes of Robin or myself going into these places. And this is the right time for it to happen. The photo industry has been so male-dominated, so dominated by foreigners coming into countries like this. And so to have, this is another front page story she did on sexual abuse within the Catholic Church. Again, a front page investigation, and other stories she's done on the environment. She works also as a freelancer for Reuters. She's been named as shortlisted for the Agency Photographer of the Year. Meanwhile, one of the other photographers who works a lot for the Agence France Presse and has done a number of exhibitions for us on forests, is also a National Geographic grantee. He's continuing his work on documenting the forests of Congo and problems of conservation. This is a look at some of his work here. Another one, Moses, is working steadily for AP and producing remarkable images, again, from his hometown of Goma, whether it's social or political. We're seeing Congo through his eyes. His work was exhibited at the Bayeux War Correspondence Festival in September, or was it October? Pamela Talizo won another big prize for her more conceptual work. Justin Makangara, who's based in Kinshasa, is working a lot for Reuters and has just been accepted into the 7 Academy, and he'll do a 6-month session at the 7 Academy in Arles, in the south of France. While Raissa, whose nice portraits you saw at the beginning of this group of photographers, did a residency here in Paris at the Musée Européen de Photographie. So really, this work, I think, is what stands out for me. Their work, how the trajectory of their careers, their contributions to storytelling from Congo is the most significant thing that came out of my project. And I think will continue to. These photographers have now created groups where they're giving workshops to other aspiring local photographers within their communities. So it's building out the culture of photography and photojournalism within their communities and within their country. And I think with the way photography and photojournalism is going at the moment, there is a shift not just from diversity and inclusion in representation, but also to kind of equity and justice in who is doing these kinds of works. So a lot of media houses have shrinking budgets. They're less likely to send somebody like myself or Robin in to Congo or to Zimbabwe now, which means that actually, while there's less work overall for many photojournalists, fewer assignments, smaller budgets, there's actually a huge opportunity for photographers on the continent to be emerging at this point. Their work is needed, their voices and perspectives are needed, the talent is there, and for so long the playing field has been tilted against them, but really now there are opportunities that exist, and it's through projects like this, like Robin's, where you're going to start seeing these kinds of stories told by the people who are living them. So, thank you.